Hey, my name is Caleb Hart. I'm 35 years old, and I live alone in a low stone and timber house at the end of Mill Hollow Road, just outside Marietta, Ohio, where the Muskingum River bends and the fog sits on the water until almost noon. It isn't much by anyone's measure. A sagging porch I've meant to fix for 3 winters, a wood stove that ticks all night, a barn that leans a little more each spring, and a small machine shop downtown with my family's name still painted on the glass. Hart Tool and Repair. My father built it with his own 2 hands, and when his heart gave out 4 years ago, he left it to me. The way a man leaves you something he hopes you won't ruin. The bank holds a note on that shop now, $31,000, and a balloon payment due the first Monday of December. Today is the last Friday of November. So you could say I already had a clock ticking in my chest before any of this began. People in town used to know me as Caleb, the quiet Hart boy who was good with engines. Then there was the fire at the old veneer mill, the winter I was 26. When I went back in for the night watchman who'd fallen by the boiler, I got him out. I didn't get out clean. The left side of my jaw and my neck carry the proof of it, a pale, ridged map of scar tissue that pulls a little when I smile, so I learned not to smile much. After that, folks didn't quite know where to put their eyes when they talked to me. They'd look at the scar, then look away, then talk a little too fast. So I stopped going out more than I had to. I open the shop at 7. I fix what people bring me. I lock up at 6 and drive home along the river to a house where the only voice is the wood stove ticking. The river doesn't mind my face. It just keeps moving, and it lets a man be. That last Friday of November, the cold came down out of the hills like something with a grudge. I'd eaten my supper, 2 pieces of dry toast and a tin of beans, because I'd let the cupboard go bare again, and I was sitting by the stove with my father's old pocket watch in my hand, just listening to it tick against the storm, when somebody knocked on my door. Nobody knocks on my door. Not at the end of Mill Hollow Road, not at 9 o'clock on a freezing night. I sat still for a moment, sure I'd imagined it. Then it came again, 3 soft knocks, knuckles that had no strength left in them. I opened the door, and the wind nearly took it out of my hand. There was a woman standing on my collapsing porch in a wedding dress. It was the kind of dress that cost more than my truck. All ivory silk and tiny pearl buttons running up the back, and it was soaked through and streaked with mud at the hem, the train torn where she'd caught it on a fence or a bramble. She had no coat. Her shoulders were bare and going blue, her dark hair plastered to her face, and she was shivering so hard her teeth knocked together. She had a small silver clutch purse held against her chest with both arms, the way you hold the only thing you managed to grab. And her eyes, when they found mine, weren't shocked by my scar the way most people's are. She was past being shocked by anything. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely holding. "I saw your light. It was the only light for miles." She swallowed. "Please, please don't send me back. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count, and I still don't have a clever answer for why I stepped aside instead of asking questions. Maybe because I knew what it was to stand somewhere and feel the door about to close in your face. Maybe because my father's voice came up in me, plain as the watch in my hand. He used to say, "You don't have to understand a thing to do right by it. You just have to not be the kind of man who shuts the door." "Get in by the stove," I said. "You're freezing." She came in like she half expected the floor to give way under her. I shut the door against the wind and the river smell and pulled the good chair close to the stove. And I got my mother's old quilt off the back of the couch and held it out without touching her. Just let her take it. She wrapped herself in it and sank down and stared into the little window of the fire like a person who had run as far as her legs would carry her and had finally stopped. I put the kettle on. I didn't ask her name. I didn't ask whose wedding she'd run out of. I figured a person tells you those things when their hand stops shaking. So I made tea with the last of the sugar, and I set it beside her. And I sat across the room where I wasn't crowding her, and for a long while the only sound was the storm and the kettle settling and her slow breathing as the blue went out of her lips. "You must think I'm out of my mind," she finally said. "I think you're cold," I said. "The rest can wait." She almost smiled at that. Then her eyes filled, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and breathed until the tears went back down. I have never seen anyone fight so hard not to cry. "My name is Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Voss. Today I was supposed to marry a man named Preston Calloway." She said the name the way you'd say the name of a bill collector. I stood at the front of a church full of 300 people in a town an hour north of here, and the minister asked if I took him, and I looked at Preston's face, and I realized I was about to spend the rest of my life being owned by someone who had never once asked me what I wanted. She drew a breath. So I lifted my dress and I ran. Out the side door, into the lot, and I just drove until my car ran out of gas at the bottom of your road. And then I walked. And then I saw your light. "Calloway," I said. The name landed in my stomach like a cold stone. Calloway Development. Half the new construction in 3 counties had their sign on it. The man who'd bought the old veneer mill site, the one that burned. And a dozen other parcels, always for a song, always after the owner had run into some sudden trouble. "I know the name. Everyone knows the name," she said bitterly. "That's the problem. My father owed Preston's father money. A lot of money. The marriage was the arrangement that settled the debt. I was the arrangement." She laughed, a small broken sound. "I'm 31 years old and I was a payment." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the true thing. "You're not a payment in this house. You're a guest who's cold. There's a spare room down the hall, clean sheets, and a door that locks from the inside. I'll be out here. In the morning we'll figure out your car and your folks and whatever you want to do. Nobody's sending you anywhere tonight." She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face loosened, just slightly, like a knot worked free. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "You don't know me." I turned the pocket watch over in my hand. "My father told me once that you don't help a person because of who they are," I said. "You help them because of who you are." I felt my face heat. He was better at saying it than I am. "No," she said quietly. He was right. In the morning the storm had blown itself out, and the river was glass under a white sky. I'd slept maybe 2 hours in the chair. When I came in from feeding the stove, she was already up, standing in the kitchen in a pair of my flannel shirts and my old work pants rolled 6 times at the cuff, the ruined wedding dress hanging over a chair like a shed skin. She'd found my pitiful cupboard and was frowning at it. "You eat like a man who's given up," she said. "I eat like a man who forgets to shop," I said. "That's the same thing said politely." She crossed her arms. "Do you have eggs? You have a barn. Tell me you at least have eggs." I had eggs. I had 4 hens that I mostly kept for the company of something alive. She made eggs and the last of the bread fried in a little butter. And she found a jar of jam my mother had put up years ago that I'd never had the heart to open, and we ate at the table my father built, and it was the best meal I'd had in 4 years, and I think she knew it, because she watched me eat it, and something in her went soft and sad and warm all at once. That morning, while she scrubbed the pan she'd cooked in, she asked me what I did, and I told her about the shop, and her whole face changed. "You fix things," she said, "like it was a wonder. For a living. People bring you something broken, and you make it work again, and they pay you, and that's the whole transaction. No one owns anyone. That's about the size of it," I said. "Do you know," she said, "I have never in my life been around a person who simply made something. My father moved money. Preston moves money. Their friends move money. Nobody I grew up with ever made a single thing with their hands that you could hold." She set the pan in the rack. "I used to think that meant they were important. I'm starting to think it meant they were empty." I didn't have an answer for that, so I drove her down to the bottom of the road to look at her car, the cream-colored sedan sitting dead where the tank had run dry. I checked it over while she stood with her arms wrapped around herself in the cold, and I found the trouble fast enough. It wasn't only the gas. The fuel pump was failing, an old fault she'd been driving on for months without knowing. And it would need a part I'd have to order from a yard up in Zanesville. I could have told her it was a day's work. I told her the truth, that the part would take the better part of a week to come in. I want to be honest with you the way I try to be honest with myself. Some quiet, hopeful, half-ashamed part of me was glad it would take a week. I had been alone a long time. I called the Callaways' wedding mess a one-night thing in my head, but one night became two, because her car needed that part I'd ordered, and two became a week, because I couldn't in good conscience drive her back to a town where a powerful man was waiting to collect on her. And in that week, the strangest, gentlest thing happened. My quiet house filled up with a second set of sounds. She fixed the cabinet hinge I'd left crooked for 2 years, found the screwdriver herself, didn't ask. She cut wildflowers, the last hardy ones along the fence line, and put them in a mason jar on the windowsill, and the kitchen looked like a place someone lived in instead of a place someone was waiting out. She walked down to the river in the mornings with her coffee, and one of those mornings I found her standing at the bank just watching the water move, and when I came up beside her, she said, without turning, "Nobody knows where I am." Do you understand what that's like for me? My whole life somebody always knew where I was. Always. And right now, standing here, nobody on this earth knows where Eleanor Voss is except a man who fixes engines. She finally looked at me. It's the freest I've ever felt. Isn't that a terrible thing to say about my own family? It isn't terrible, I said. It's just true. Sometimes those are the same thing. In the evenings, I taught her the things my father taught me, because she asked, because she wanted to know how the world was put together under its skin. I showed her how a carburetor breathed, how to tell a good weld from a bad one by the color of the bead, how my father used to say a machine never lies to you, it only tells you the truth louder than you want to hear it. She took to it the way she took to everything, fast and serious, frowning, her tongue between her teeth. And when she got the lawnmower engine I keep on the bench to turn over on the second pull, she laughed out loud. A real laugh. The first one I'd heard from her. And I realized I'd been waiting all week to hear what it sounded like. She told me, in pieces, across those evenings, what her life had been. She'd been raised in a cold, beautiful house on a hill where her father measured love in compliance, where her mother had died when she was 12 and the warmth had died with her, and her father had filled the empty rooms with deals instead of people. She'd been sent to the right schools. She'd been steered at every turn toward men her father could use. She'd never been asked one single time what she wanted. Preston wasn't even cruel at first, she said. That's the part I can't make people understand. He was worse than cruel. He was indifferent. He looked at me the way you'd look at a good car you decided to buy, pleased with the purchase and not curious about it at all. I told her about the fire then, the whole of it, the smell of it, the watchman's name, the heat through the soles of my boots, the months in the burn ward when I'd lie awake and listen to the men around me and learn that pain has a sound. The day I came home and a girl I'd gone to school with crossed the street rather than meet my eyes. She listened without flinching once. When I finished, she was quiet a long time, and then she said, "They crossed the street because you reminded them they weren't brave enough to do what you did. The scar isn't your shame, Caleb. It's theirs." One evening she came and stood close to me by the stove, closer than anyone had stood in years, and she lifted her hand, and before I could turn the scarred side of my face away, she touched it. Just laid her cool fingers along that ruined ridge of skin, gently, the way you'd touch something precious that had been broken. "Don't," I said. "It isn't. It's a good man who walked into a fire for a stranger," she said. "I don't see a monster, Caleb. I see the only person in a long time who looked at me and saw a person back." Her thumb moved along the scar. "Stop hiding the best thing about you." I didn't have words. I put my hand over her hand, and we stood like that while the stove ticked and the river ran, and I understood, with a clarity that frightened me, that this woman who had blown into my life in a wedding dress had taken the lock off a room in me I'd nailed shut 9 years ago. I should have known a man like Preston Calloway doesn't lose a payment quietly. It was a Tuesday when the black car came down Mill Hollow Road. I was at the shop, but Eleanor told me about it that night, her voice steady, but her hands betraying her. Preston himself had come, in a coat that cost more than my barn, with a lawyer beside him in the passenger seat. He hadn't come to the door. He'd stood in my muddy yard and called up to the porch where Eleanor stood, and he'd smiled the whole time. "You've made your little point," he'd said. "Come home, Eleanor. Your father is in a great deal of trouble, and you're the only thing standing between him and a court date. Surely you don't want to do this to your own family over a tantrum and He'd looked around at my house, my barn, my hen's dot, over a charity case with a scarred face. She'd told him no. She'd told him she wasn't a debt to be paid. And Preston had stopped smiling, just for a second, and said the thing that turned my blood cold when she repeated it to me. He'd said, "Then I'll have to be paid another way. That man's father borrowed against his shop the year before he died. Did you know that? The note is sloppy, the kind of note a smart man can buy and call. By Christmas, your scarred friend won't have a shop to hide in either. Think about that while you're playing house." I sat very still when she finished. I had spent 9 years learning to keep my face still, and I was grateful for it then, because what I felt was not fear. Exactly. It was the cold, clear thing a man feels when the last excuse to stay small gets taken away from him. For 9 years I had told myself that hiding at the end of Mill Hollow Road was humility. Sitting at that table with Eleanor's frightened eyes on me, I understood it had only ever been hiding, and that the man my father raised did not get to hide any more. Because what she'd told me was true. My father had borrowed against Hart Tool and Repair that last year, when his heart was already failing, and he was too proud to tell me how bad things had gotten. The balloon payment due the first Monday of December. $31,000 I did not have, and now I understood that the man I owed it to was about to become Preston Calloway, and that he would call it not to collect money, but to break me, to teach Eleanor what it cost to choose a nobody. "Caleb," Eleanor said, "I'll go back. I'm not letting him take everything you have because of me." "No," I said, and I surprised myself with how hard it came out. "You're not a payment in this house." We settled that the first night. I took her hands. "Let me think. There's something wrong with how that man does business. There's always been something wrong with it. I just never had a reason to look before. And here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. People say everything in front of you. They think a quiet man with a scarred face isn't really listening. I'd spent 9 years in that shop, and the men who came in for repairs talked. I knew, the way you know things in a small place, that Preston Calloway's father had built his fortune the same way, finding folks who'd borrowed against their property, buying up their sloppy paper, and calling the notes the moment trouble hit, then snapping up the land for nothing. The veneer mill, the Doyle farm, the Peterson orchard, the same pattern over and over for 30 years. I just had to prove that the pattern was a crime and not a coincidence. I started with the one ally a quiet man builds without meaning to. Rosa Delgato clerked at the county recorder's office, and I'd kept her ancient station wagon running for years for the cost of parts because she was widowed and raising a grandson. When I came in and asked, careful and quiet, to see the public record on the Calloway property transactions going back 20 years, she looked at my face for a long moment and said, "This is about that girl, isn't it? The one in the dress. The whole county's talking." Then she pulled the volumes herself and sat me at the back table with a lamp and a pot of coffee, and she didn't charge me a thing. We worked 3 nights in that back room after the office closed, Rosa and Eleanor and me. The 3 of us bent over deed books under a grain-shaded lamp while the courthouse clock chimed the hours over our heads. Eleanor turned out to have a gift for it none of us expected. All those years watching her father move money had taught her, without her ever wanting to learn, exactly how a man hides a theft inside a stack of legal paper. She'd run her finger down a column and stop and say, "There, why is there a 60-day gap between the loan and the call?" Every single time. That's not how a real bank behaves. A real bank wants its money paid, not its borrower destroyed. 60 days is how long it takes to make sure the trouble sticks. She was right. Once she'd named the rhythm, we saw it everywhere. It was all there in the plain public record for anyone patient enough to read it. Every property Calloway Development had acquired cheap for 30 years had the same story buried in the paper. A private loan, often originated by a shell company with a Calloway address. A note with a balloon payment. A call on the note within 60 days of a fire, a flood, a sudden illness, a death. And then, every single time, the deed transferred to Calloway for a fraction of its worth. The veneer mill. The Doyle farm. My own father's shop, where the note had already been quietly assigned to a Calloway shell 3 weeks ago, the ink barely dry, dated the very day after Eleanor ran. But the thing that made my hands go still on the page was the Peterson orchard. Old Peterson had borrowed $12,000, and the note showed it. Except the original loan document, the one filed in the basement archives that Rosa dug out coughing on the dust, showed Peterson had borrowed $8,000. Someone had altered the figure after the fact and called a debt that was $4,000 larger than what the man had ever signed for. And the notary stamp that certified the altered document belonged to a man named Harold Beck, who had notarized nearly every fraudulent Callaway note for 30 years. I had it. Not just a sad pattern. Fraud in ink with a name on it. The night we found the Beck stamp, the night the whole thing finally came together, the worst storm of the season was howling against the courthouse windows. And when Rosa locked up and went home, Eleanor and I sat in my truck in the empty lot. Too wound up to drive, the heater ticking, the wipers off, the snow burying the windshield until the world went white and close and quiet around us. She was shaking, not from cold this time. If this doesn't work, she said, he takes your shop, and it'll be my fault, and I'll have cost you the only thing your father left you. And if you'd married him, I said, you'd have cost yourself the only life you've got. We're not doing that math, Eleanor. We're not weighing what you're worth against a building. She turned to me in the dark. Why does it always sound so simple when you say it? Because it is simple, I said. People just make it complicated so they can get away with things. And then, because the snow had sealed us in and there was nowhere left to look but at each other, I said the thing I'd been carrying around all week. I need you to know something. Whatever happens Monday, you didn't ruin my quiet life. You're the first good thing that's walked into it in 9 years. If I lose the shop and keep this, the week of teaching you welds and listening to you laugh at the lawnmower, then I came out ahead. I want you to hear me say it before a judge does or doesn't say something that changes everything. She didn't answer with words. She reached across the dark cab and put her hand against the scarred side of my face, the way she had by the stove, and she leaned in, and in a snowed-in truck in a courthouse parking lot, with the whole frozen county holding still around us, she kissed me. It was not a careful kiss. It was a kiss like a decision. And when she pulled back, she pressed her forehead to mine and whispered, "Then we're already ahead. Now let's go win the rest of it." I'd love to tell you it was easy after that, but the hearing on my father's note was set for the first Monday of December, the day the payment came due, in the county courthouse in Marietta, and I had 3 days and no lawyer. What I had was Rosa, who knew everyone, and who made a single phone call to a young attorney named Marcus Ade, who'd grown up 2 roads over and owed this town more than he'd admit. He looked at the records I'd copied and went very quiet, and then said, "Mr. Hart, do you understand what this is? This isn't a defense. This is 30 years of consumer fraud against the poorest people in 3 counties. If we file this right, you don't just save your shop, you finish him. Word travels in a small county." By the Monday of the hearing, the courthouse gallery was full, and not with Callaway's people. The Doyles were there. The Peterson sons were there, grown men now, who'd lost their father's orchard at 19 and never understood why. The old night watchman I'd pulled from the fire sat in the second row, leaning on his cane, and Eleanor sat beside me in a plain blue dress she'd bought in town, her chin up, her hand finding mine under the table. Preston Callaway came in like he was arriving at a party he owned, with his lawyer and his smile, expecting to collect a shop from a scarred man too poor to fight. He'd brought a banker's box of paper, the call note, the assignment, all of it neat and lethal. His lawyer stood and laid it out for the judge in smooth board sentences. The note was valid. The balloon payment was due today and unpaid. The bank, meaning Callaway, was entitled to the property. It would take, he said, about 4 minutes. Then Marcus Ade stood up. "Your Honor," he said, "before the court enforces this note, the defense would like to establish where it came from." And he began to lay the records on the bench, one by one, the way you'd lay down a winning hand of cards, slow, so everyone could see. The veneer mill, the Doyle farm, the pattern of loans and calls and deaths and fires. And then the Peterson orchard, the original $8,000 note and the altered $12,000 copy beside it, and the notary stamp of Harold Beck that connected the alteration to the very same desk that had assigned my father's note to Calloway 3 weeks ago. The smile came off Preston Calloway's face slowly, like paint peeling. Your Honor, this is a stunt his lawyer started, but the judge, a flinty woman named Judge Okafor, who'd grown up poor in this same county, lifted one hand without looking at him. She was reading the Peterson documents. She read them for a long, long time. The whole room held its breath. "Mr. Calloway," she said finally, and her voice was very cold and very quiet, "is this notary, Harold Beck, an employee of yours or of Calloway Development?" Preston's lawyer leaned to whisper. Preston didn't take his eyes off the judge. "He does work for the company," he said. "And can you explain to this court," Judge Okafor said, "why a document bearing his stamp shows a borrowed figure $4,000 higher than the original instrument filed in this very building?" Preston Calloway, for the first time in his gilded life, had no smooth sentence ready. He opened his mouth and nothing came. "I didn't think so," the judge said. She set the papers down. "This court will not enforce a note that arrives wrapped in 3 decades of apparent fraud. The note against Hartool and Repair is unenforceable as a matter of law, and that transaction is declared void." She looked over the rim of her glasses at the gallery, at the Petersons, at the Doyles, at the old watchman. "Furthermore, I am referring the entirety of these records to the county prosecutor and the state attorney general's office for criminal investigation. Mr. Calloway, you may want a different lawyer than the one who walked you in here." She struck her gavel. "We are adjourned." The room did not cheer. It did something better. It went quiet. And then, one by one, people stood. The Peterson sons, the Doyles, the watchman with his cane, until the whole gallery was on its feet, and Preston Calloway had to walk out through the middle of all of them, past every family he'd ruined, with no one saying a word and no one looking away. He stopped once at the end of our row and looked down at me, and for the first time he really looked at the scar, the way the whole town had always looked at it, and he opened his mouth to say something cutting about it, some last small cruelty to carry out the door with him. "Don't," Eleanor said, before he could. She didn't stand. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked up at him from her chair with a calm I will admire to the end of my days. "You spent a fortune learning everything about me except the one thing that mattered. You never once wondered what I'd choose if anyone let me. Well, now you know. Go home, Preston. There's nothing here that belongs to you." He went. I will remember the sound of his shoes on that floor for the rest of my life. It was the sound of a powerful man learning he was alone. Outside on the courthouse steps, in the thin December sun, Eleanor turned to me. There were tears on her face now, but they were a different kind. "You could have just paid him off some other way and saved yourself," she said. "You went after all of it, for people you barely know. I went after it for you," I said. And then, somewhere in those basement records, it stopped being only about you. My father always said, "You don't get to keep your own corner clean if you let a man burn down the whole street." I touched her cheek with the scarred side of my hand, and for once I didn't think about hiding it. I kissed you in a snowed-in truck because I couldn't help it. But I've never once said it out loud to you in the daylight, so I'm going to. I love you, Eleanor. I think I have since the morning you made eggs and told me I ate like a man who'd given up. And I don't want you to leave when your car's fixed. I want you to stay for good. I just don't have a single grand way to ask it. Then ask me the plain way, she said. The plain way is the only thing you've ever said to me that I believed. So I did. Right there on the courthouse steps, with no ring, with my balloon payment voided, and my shop saved, and the woman who'd come to me in a ruined wedding dress standing in a plain blue one. And she said yes, and the night we'd run from became a thing that had simply pointed her toward the right door. A year after the night it rained, the porch at the end of Mill Hollow Road doesn't sag anymore, because we fixed it together, board by board, on the Saturdays when the shop is closed. Hart Tool and Repair has my name on the glass still, and Eleanor's name in the ledger now, because she runs the books better than my father ever did. Preston Calloway's company sits in receivership, and the Peterson sons got a settlement that bought back a piece of their father's orchard, and last spring they planted new trees on it. Eleanor and I get married in the little stone church in town this June, and the old night watchman is going to walk her down the aisle. Because her own father didn't deserve to and asked anyway, and she said no with the same steel she said it to Preston. 300 people aren't invited. About 40 are. The right 40. Rosa Delgado is making the cake, and won't let either of us see it, and her grandson is the ring bearer. Marcus Ade stood in my kitchen last week and shook my hand and told me that the state attorney general had opened 7 cases off the records we pulled, and that 2 of the Doyle parcels were going to be returned, and then this big, serious lawyer had to look out my window for a minute before he could talk again, because he'd grown up watching those families lose everything and never once believed. He'd see it set right. She found her way back to her father, too, in a smaller way than he wanted and a healthier way than she'd ever had. She wrote him 1 letter. She didn't ask for anything, and she didn't forgive everything. She just told him she was alive, she was happy, she was married to a man who fixes engines and walked into a fire for a stranger once, and that the door was open if he ever wanted to learn how to be a father instead of a creditor. He hasn't come yet. But she sleeps fine, she says, because for the first time the choosing is hers. She's standing on our fixed porch right now as I write this, in the morning fog off the river, with her coffee with one hand resting low on her belly, where, come autumn, there's going to be a 3rd set of sounds in this house. She caught me watching her through the window, and she didn't look away from my face, and she never has. Not once. I used to think the fire took the best part of me and left a scar where it had been. But a frightened woman knocked on my door at the end of the worst night of her life and asked me not to send her back. And from that one knock, I was given everything. Kindness doesn't always come back the way you expect, and it rarely comes back right away. But if you still open the door, if you still let the cold stranger in by your fire, that single moment might just turn out to be the night your whole life finally began.